Now, next up, we've got a huge treat. We're going to hear from Natalie Bell, who's the CEO of Gottlieb. Her talk is entitled Why Good Old-Fashioned Media's Never Been More Exciting, which I'm sure lots of our viewers will chime with very much. So, Natalie, over to you.
Hi there, thank you. Hello, everyone. I hope you've had a lovely day so far. So I was briefed on Dare to be Different on this, and actually I think this is definitely being different in that I'm pitching why good old-fashioned media and media planning, and we'll talk about that, has never been so exciting. I would say that as a CEO of a media agency, but let me explain to you why. Clearly, in this environment, as we look forward, and it is all about looking forward, it would be remiss of us not to also reflect on the year that we've had and the learnings that we can take from the year. As we do look forward, I think we have to reflect on those forces that have forced us to change in many ways. Clearly, COVID is one of them. I'll talk specifically about that in the good ways I think it's forced us to change. Regulation, indirect or directly, around data, and we've heard a lot about that today over the last couple of days. And then importantly, competition. So when we think about media channels, I think we've seen the sort of peak competition of everybody competing for our advertising spend and the advancements they're making in order to fight for that. And then, of course, naturally, we've had advances in technology that will continue to take place. So today, I'm going to think about those forces and think about how we've been forced to reset in our media planning, how we have been forced to rethink how we go about doing what we're doing, and then how exciting it is that we get to reimagine how we do it as we move forward. So firstly, on the reset point, I got into media agencies a very, very long time ago in digital, but I was always fascinated by it and excited by it because we talked about audiences, we talked about how we could reach those audiences, we thought about behavioural science and insight and all these wonderful things about people. And I think somewhere along the way, we sort of lost that and we got caught up in the complexity of the data that supported it and lost what the job was that we were doing in media planning. And many more smarter people than me will explain what our job is, but I'll do it in a simpler way. Ultimately, our job is take the task of a client, think about who we want to reach and the data that allows us to do that, where and how we want to reach them and at what price, what we want to say when we're reaching them with our creative partners, to do what, and did it work? And that's our job. And data fuels all of that. And we've heard over the last couple of days how that happens. What I think's really interesting about the last year and the impacts that COVID has had is that we've never had such unprecedented, I'm going to use the word, seismic change in people's behaviour in such a short period of time. And as a result, I've actually loved the conversations with clients over the last year and with media owners as well, because suddenly we're asking questions that really matter again. So there's a renewed emphasis on where audiences are, the channels we can reach them, what that means on any given day and changes day by day. On top of that, we're thinking much more about the mindset of the audience and the empathy of the message that we deliver to them in that moment. We've also been thinking a lot more about path to conversion with renewed focus, because if people can't buy wherever we want or wherever they want to in a moment, then we're a lot more focused about where we want them to buy from us, you know, predominantly the difference between a high street or a digital commerce option. And then finally, we followed behaviours acutely and in an informed way, which has been, I think, extremely interesting. On top of that, unprecedented as a word meant that we couldn't look back at old results because they didn't apply quite so well as they did in these times. So we had to think of new things to do with data and measurement. Equally, one of my favourite exercises is to take a budget, halve it, ask if the strategy still applies, and then be more considered about what you would cut from your spend. Well, we had to do that actually through this period. And I think, again, it's refocused on what matters. And finally, a bit from a media agency perspective, I've actually really enjoyed talking about media pricing in a different way again, as we've been much more aware of the volatility of media pricing, which is driven by supply and demand, and we've seen those swings more than ever before. So that's all great, all obvious. People are using channels that are in home more than they're using channels out of home, but it's not that simple, because actually what we saw was that the way people were using it changed during the period. No matter which country you're in, depending on regulations, you were in or out of home in different ways, and we had to react fast to that. But equally, there were nuances in channels. So in audio, we saw that in-home radio listening increased through voice devices, whereas podcasts through commuting hours naturally decreased. And we had to think acutely about these changes. I also think there's an interesting thing that's happened in this period, which is that we have seen the role that channels and media plays in our lives possibly focused to a point that every channel has shone in its real unique strength. So TV is the entertainer again. News has never been more important on a daily basis, and trusted news as well. In social, we're using it as a connection platform again, and also for a lot of laughter through this period. I think what's interesting about online video is we've seen it become a coach, a tutor, an advisor, much more tutorials playing out through that, which has been amazing. And then on top of that, out of home actually has become much more about its local environment. So lots of interesting things. One point to make on that is Google's mission could never have been more accurate than through this period in what they drove through Google Classroom. So we have to rethink how we do things alongside that, with data and ways of working fundamentally needing to have changed. I won't talk about data too much because it's talked about a lot over the last couple of days, and we all know that it needed to change, particularly our approach to cookies and responsibility with data. But equally, ways of working as well, and I'll just reference a campaign we've run. So just on the data point, I think in our rush for data, we got a bit muddled. We forgot what was important, and that's okay, but we've got a chance now to rethink it. And my watch out as we rethink it is that as we move to this wonderful world of first-party data being the most important and valuable thing we have, let's not just apply it, please, to the bottom of the funnel in our targeting. Let's think about how it also informs and can play a role in the top of the funnel as well. I think there's a danger that we'll get too ensconced in the bottom. So just on ways of working, we run the UK government's COVID campaign. I think that we have been forced through this period to think about how we can be as agile, granular, targeted, responsive as possible. And all of the things that we've always wanted to be in this world, we have achieved. We had to find new ways of doing it because there was a new need. And long may that continue. So finally, what's today about for me? It's about all of those principles coming through, rethinking to what matters, and then how that plays out in the reimagination of old-fashioned media. All of these statements on the right, I'm sure everyone has been talking about: programmatic, data-led, innovative, agile, shoppable, measurable, content-led, which we apply in digital to influencers. Well, these things are now applicable to all channels for the most part, particularly in AV and out of home. And that's where I get really excited, because I think through this period, whilst we've had the impact of COVID and the impact of regulation, we've also had a forced impact of technological advance and data advancement in our traditional media channels. So that means TV has never been more exciting and actually safe from a first-party data perspective, and how you use it, whether it be in measurement, in cross-channel campaigns, in content, is just a wonderful place to be. I think also out of home actually is one of my favourite media. Oh, apologies. Let's just go back. And this is a wonderful case study that I'll just mention with our client Specsavers, which is a local eye glasses retailer. So Specsavers had a business task. The business task was, how do you manage capacity in stores when queuing to wait for an appointment is a bad thing and you lose customers? How do you bring new people into the store? Well, we use their first party data, which was about capacity from 800 stores, imagine that, to demonstrate how much capacity there was and push people from moment in digital out of home into the store for them to go in and have an eye test. And we were driving essentially excess demand that was out there in the high street into the store based on real-time capacity and managing demand so that there were never queues. So I think that is a lovely way of showing how actually, going back to my first point, thinking about who you want to reach to do what, where and how you want to reach them, what you want to say and how you measure that and how you use data in all of those elements. And did it work? It absolutely did. What a wonderful example of it coming together. So that's me. Let's make sure we reflect as much as we look ahead. And I would just ask that in our rush to move forward, we don't lose what we've learned along the way. And I genuinely think there's never been a more exciting time for old-fashioned media and media planning. Thank you.
That's a fantastic, great call to arms. So lots of questions coming in here. Let's start one from me. We saw the poll earlier, sort of if people how positive people were about Q2. How positive are you about Q2?
I would say we're using a phrase at the moment, which I would say cautiously optimistic. I think naturally there are, and I use another phrase, there are lots of green shoots in the market with clients. Clearly, the verticals will dictate that. But yeah, I think cautiously optimistic. Spends are looking good. Opportunities in market are looking good. I'm worried about some channels. You know, we need to support arts and cinema and publishing and others. But yeah, cautiously optimistic.
Excellent. Good to hear. Okay, it's a question here from Anonymous, who asks, behaviours are changing rapidly, and once the vaccine rollout is completed, are likely to change yet again. How do you keep up and predict?
In the same way we have for the last year, I think. You know, they are changing rapidly. We've got so good now, I think, working with data partners, media owner partners, at understanding the right things that matter and not getting overwhelmed in the data that doesn't. So in all channels, you know, as I said earlier, we've got acute awareness and information on what people are doing, how they're doing it. I think the big thing for me is also making sure that we are understanding mindsets, as I said, that empathy point, because yes, the vaccine's going to come through. We don't know how it's going to play out. We can expect it to play out a certain way, but we will have to be much more conscious of the mindset that goes along with that and how people change.
Another question I'd like to ask, you talked about out of home. You know, one of the things that out of home, it did a really good job throughout this period in terms of programmatic being able to turn on or off as the tiers change, for instance. So what about local advertising? Have you seen a focus on local strategies of your clients change during this time?
Completely, because to the point, it's easy to say people are in home or out of home, but actually, I think we'll see a bit of a shift from city to local, which is a good thing. And I think more granular, localized understanding, and with the ability in digital to be much more contextual as well as real time, as well as, programmatically driven. So I see that absolutely. And I think it's based on consumer need and path to conversion, wherever that conversion is.
Okay, you mentioned empathy. That's been a big sort of theme the last couple of days here. How do you see brands' use of, I'll say techniques, but empathy, kindness, all these great attributes that a lot of brands have showed over this time? Do you think these will continue as we come out of the pandemic, or are these going to be equally forgotten?
Well, I hope it continues, and I think if you look at data that we derive, particularly in social, there's no excuse not to be empathetic to how audiences are feeling and understanding, the vibe and the sentiment of audiences, whether that be empathy to how they feel about your product or sustainability overall, or how they feel about, their lives in that moment. There's no excuse, I think, for us to lose it. So I do hope that we continue it as a narrative.
Me too. Well, thank you so much. That was a really inspirational chat. Thank you very much.